All right, welcome one and all to a new episode of Unscripted Liberation Codes, coming to you weekly since a few weeks ago. And as those of you following us know, we talk about cosmic consciousness, the esoterica. Um, my starseed identity, Mario's keen astrological insights. So we are really glad that you're gracing us with your presence again. And we are really excited about today because Mario, of course, knows everybody anywhere, all the time, always, and has been able to arrange a, a great time with a acclaimed author of an incredible experience. We have with us today Olivia James. Olivia James is the author of Grey Mouse, Sex, Space, and Mind Control, as well as Grey Mouse Purgatory. Olivia is a survivor of MK Ultra and covert psychological operations, and both of these books explore mind control, espionage, interdimensional experiences. So we are going to dive into this today, and it's really prescient because there are a few other stories bubbling in the collective consciousness that have to do with this sort of like Hollywood, Babylonian, um, funky, scary situation. So this is a place of liberation and a place of free discussion, and we're going to go there. So Olivia, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah, and
Thank you for that introduction, Alex.
yeah.
Olivia, would you tell us a little bit about how all this got started for you?
Yeah, and I just want to make sure I do my disclaimer. This is my personal experience, and a lot of these are my personal views. And I usually like to this is my truth. So I, express my truth in this, anytime I talk. So I just wanted to make sure people know that. Um, so I always like to start with talking about my parents because that's how I got involved into these programs at the beginning. So I had very interesting parents. My father was recruited very young, at a very young age, about 18 years old, from a very small town. He got recruited into military intelligence, and he must have been testing off the charts, for whatever they needed. He actually learned German in about 6 months, and he was stationed on the Russian and German border. He was doing code breaking. They were doing a lot of code breaking there and things like that. So when he came out of the military, I guess he couldn't find his bearing and what he wanted to do. These are like the 60s and 70s, when he was doing all this. And he ended up getting involved with some kind of nefarious characters to make money. And we call them
Mm.
cartels now, but in the 60s and 70s, they still were calling them kind of like crime syndicates and things like that. So what he was doing, he became involved in some major drug trafficking. He was trafficking huge amounts of heroin across the border. And if anybody knows anything about the drug trade and the drug trafficking in the 60s and 70s, it's pretty well known that there was a lot of government involvement in some of those activities. Um, and
Hmm.
so when he sometimes, because my mom's still alive, but when she talks about it, cause she was a partner with him, they kind of thought that they were just so awesome that she thought they were so awesome they never got caught. But actually, there was a lot of agreements made, especially when they were doing drug trafficking across the border by bus. Bus would get pulled over and nothing would happen because she used to use the bus a lot for her trafficking and strap it to her stomach and get on the bus and cross the border. So
Wow.
they were
Wow.
making tons of money, very young, 19 and early 20s, things like that. I was just a baby when this was happening. And um, he ended up getting addicted to his own product. So if anybody knows anything about addiction, it's very difficult. He became extremely addicted to his own product and he started to mess up. He was missing drops, he was missing meetings and that kind of thing. And so in the small town where we're from, they were trying to scare him a little bit. So they did a couple of raids. The first raid was just kind of like to scare him and scare him straight, kind of, which didn't work. So
Wow.
they ended up doing a second raid, and in that second raid is the one where he got arrested. And I remember, the cops burst through the front gate, smashed into the house and, ended up beating up my dad really bad. But he ended up speaking to my mom in Spanish to get all the, take whatever they had and throw it in the toilet and everything. But they had a really big public trial. It went on forever. He had a really expensive lawyer, things like that. And it was looking like he was going to spend life in prison. That's what they were saying. He was going to go to life in prison for the amount of drugs he had and what he was doing and things like that. So, like I said, it was very public. It was in the newspapers. And back in those days, media was newspapers. Everything was written and pictures were actually drawn in the newspapers instead of photos and things like that. So I remember seeing a lot of those clippings when I was a little kid. And at the end of the trial, something really weird happened. They just let him go. They just said they had the wrong person and let him go. And
What?
then they ended up giving him a local government job. They hired a very well-known drug trafficker, and
Wow.
heroin addict kinda thing. So I did a lot of, searching, and, me and my father were very, estranged my whole life. We just couldn't find that common ground. I never felt cared about or loved or anything like that. And he passed away quite a while back. But and doing some of my you know, psychic work and, astral travel, bilocation, remote viewing, spirit hosting, kind of like my psychic medium work, I was able to make contact with him, and we have a relationship now, and he really told me a lot about what had happened and why he did the things he did. And one of the things that he told me is that he had to give something up in order to stay out of prison. I pretty much, I hate to say it, but he was a coward, and he couldn't go to prison, and so he would rather give something up, and he gave me up. He signed me over and let them use me if he could stay out of prison. And in a way,
Mm.
I felt like he kind of felt like he maybe sacrificed one to save the rest, kind of thing. There was so many different aspects, and it was very complex. And this is a big, huge deal. He didn't want to go to prison for life like I thought he was. So in terms of MK Ultra, that's what he signed me up for. And the start, from what I remember of the actual programming, was right around, I think, about age 6 or 7. I remember being taken to a psychiatric hospital. And I asked my mom before if she ever remembers me leaving, going anywhere, because I was there for 6 months. And, how could I be there with nobody saying anything? And I asked her if she ever remembers me leaving. And all she said was that it's possible. She didn't know. So that's kinda not really, for me, if somebody asks me, "Is my kid around?" I say, "Absolutely. I know where my kid is. He's sleeping next door, he's in bed." So that was kind of an interesting answer, but I appreciate it. I appreciate the honesty. I need the truth. I don't, I don't want them to mince words. Even my father, now that I speak to him more, now that he's passed away, I rather him, tell me the exact truth, and that's what I needed. So at the psychiatric hospital, this was, on the East Coast. And I usually don't say the name of it. It's just, I do know the name, but I just don't say it because it's really easy to find if somebody wanted to look up and research, because it's no longer open, and it's kind of used like for ghost hunting and things. People go and do ghost hunting there and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, but it was a huge place. They had a self-sustaining type building network, and they had their own, like gardens and crops, and they had a lot of underground tunnels and things like that. But I remember getting there, and I remember my feet hitting the ground, and as soon as I looked up, I saw on the stairs there was this kind of like she looked older. She maybe was like in her 50s. Um and she had white hair, and she always dressed really elegantly, and she had her hair pinned up. So it was really interesting that the main programmer of this place was a female. It was a woman. She was the MK Ultra handler and programmer. So that I thought that was really interesting that it was a woman there. And it was a very
Make you
small
feel
program.
comfortable.
Yeah, something. I don't know what they were doing, but it was a small program. It was just me and another child named Jacob. And they had very specific goals that they wanted for this particular programming. And we were kind of like in a back building. It was almost looked like a children's wing. So we were kind of in the back, and they had like a playroom and a lot of like two little rooms and children's things everywhere. So they had a plan for us. And what they were trying to accomplish, from what I know, is something called syncopated dissociation. That was part of the reason they were doing this. They wanted to see if they could get me and Jacob to dissociate at the same time. So what they task themselves with doing is trying to use a systematic type of torture. So, and I thought, and for some reason, that worked really well for them, because they would change their activity every 15 to 20 minutes. It's almost like a little school program, like behavior, like a strict behavior modification where you can hear like a little bell. So they would change the program every 15 to 20 minutes. And they, they used a very sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological, emotional. They'd also deprive you of like food and water and not being able to use the bathroom and things like that. They were trying to get us to get to a certain state of consciousness where you don't need anything. And they did it. They did very well. They made us not want anything anymore. Even if I was hurt or Jacob was hurt, we didn't cry. We didn't ask for food anymore. We didn't ask for anything. We didn't ask to go to the bathroom. We didn't even need anything anymore. That's how much they had broken us down with their torturous program. They had broken us down so much. And they were trying to create altars within us. Um, and the programmer, I call her Mrs. W. She she used a lot of hypnosis, LSD, and electroshock therapy for her part of the programming. She was the main overarching, you know, handler of the whole thing, and she would tell the other orderlies. There was two males that did a lot of the physical and sexual torture to us, but she did a lot of like the emotional and psychological. In her office, she would do hypnosis. She made some very big I don't know, progress, I guess, in hypnosis with us two in that room. I know she did because
Mm.
I remember. And there was a way that we had gotten so good at trance that she would have us sit in a chair like opposite each other, and she would put our palms up in the chair and just relax. And she would put an acupuncture needle in the middle of our palms. So acupuncture needles don't hurt. But when she did that, it kind of directly leads you to trance. Like it's like almost like that specific road straight to trance. She had somehow figured that out, that we could do it very quickly. So Jacob and I, according to her, we were like prize pupils. We had taken to the abuse very well. So we were almost what she considered perfect assets because we didn't speak, we didn't make any noise, we just were empty on the inside, pretty much empty. And I remember that when Jacob and I were being electroshocked, they were doing electroshock therapy on us. I remember how quickly we could leave the body because I remember, I was in one bed, Jacob was in the other, and I looked over at Jacob, and he wasn't even in his body. He was playing. His spirit had left the body, and he was just playing like a little kid, running around and being silly because I remember that was the only time we could be kids is if you left the body. So we would leave the body and like kind of like play together in the room while they were torturing the physical body. So it was intense that day. We were able to be pushed out of the body so quickly. We had learned how to do that to keep ourselves safe. So they discovered so much with hypnosis. They had put a lot of heavy hypnosis with us, and they had made some very big, you know, advancements in that. And she ended up sending me out because she found something. In the hypnosis sessions, she found something. So she sent me out to another, what I thought was a psychiatrist. So I went to his office, and his office was very neat. And, they had a lot of neutral furniture in there. It was just very calming. So it didn't really look like a hospital or anything. And when I went there, I know his name was Dr. Green. And everybody says, I'm not quite sure. I only knew him as Dr. Green, but people say his name is Mangala. But Dr. Green, when I saw him, he was very, very old, very frail, looked like he was almost 90, like, very frail, but he was not somebody to be messed with. Just his energy was very, I don't know, scary almost, but not to the point that I was afraid that he would physically harm me. Something about him was always kept me on the edge. So when I was there, Dr. Green instructed these two people, and I think they were brother and sister. They were very light skinned, so I think they had an albino condition. He instructed them to give me an examination. So they held hands, and they kind of, I don't know, they were doing like this weird physical exam on me, like, looking in my eyes and in my ears and, just checking over my body, things like that. And then they told me to open my mouth and say, ah. And when I did that, they looked way deep inside my mouth. And then they turned to Dr. Green and said, we see it. They said, we see the thing inside her. So that's when Dr. Green decided that I would be good for a project that he was, kind of piloting called Project Traveler. So what but I think I know they were wrong because I'm pretty sure they thought that I was possessed, that I was a possessed child, and that I had an attachment. But they were wrong in their thinking because I wasn't possessed. What they were seeing was really me on the inside. They had, seen so deep at my cellular level. Whatever psychic ability these twins had, they were able to see, like, at my cellular level, to see what I was. So they saw something deep inside me, but they thought it was, an attached entity, something like that. And in Project Traveler, they're trying to see if they can take control of some of that. There's so much power behind that. The unknown realms, they wanted to, take control of it, get information from there. There's so much there that, mystery. They wanted to get to it. So I was taken into that. And when I went back to the psych hospital, they were doing, extra, experiments and things like that. They ended up trying to do like sensory deprivation. So they had me sit in a room kind of like in the dark, and it wasn't in water or anything. I just sat in a wooden chair. I just had on like a nightgown, and they put a blindfold on my eyes and they hooked me up to an IV. And what they wanted me to do, because that's what they figured out I could do, is to allow myself to be almost like a portal. The portal for me is in the inside. So I open my portal and let anything step through and take over my body. And that's what they wanted to see. And they wanted to take scientific measurements of that, like when I let the entity inside my body, they take like body measurements, to see if there's any type of output, whether it be electrical or anything, the heart rate, anything. They're measuring all that to see what happens exactly when something takes over my body. So they were doing that for a long time. And I thought I was really conflicted. And I always say this, that I felt conflicted because I'm I'm supposed to be afraid of dark entities that were inside my body during that time, and that I was, but the humans were the ones that were torturing me. And the entities, when they took over my body, they were keeping me alive because they didn't feed me during those days. They just had me in that chair for 3 days, a little kid with nothing except for an IV hookup. So the entities that came into my body are the ones that sustained me for that time. So it's conflicting to, the humans are torturing, but these other beings are trying to keep me alive. So it was really strange
Can I
for me.
ask, Olivia,
But I wanted to talk about some of the past lives I had. Yeah, yeah,
were
sure.
these things you remembered throughout your entire life, or did you have forgotten them and then memories started to come back to you? Both. Okay.
Both. I had a lot of memories since childhood, and then I had some, as I got older, and then it kind of just exploded about, I think, around 2018. Yeah, 2018, when I started to have major memories.
Okay. Interesting. And then
Hmm.
with your parents drug trafficking, and your with your father um, joining the military, was he like? Did you find out if you were a part of any particular like bloodline lineage, any kind of particular families of some sort?
Yes. Um, so my family is direct descendant of all the royal houses of Europe, and definitely didn't know because I grew up really poor. And we didn't, a lot of people don't look into their genealogy. This was a project I took on about 5 years ago, and because I wanted to know, like, why would they choose me? Who am I? Why would they want me in this program? And it was real. I was a direct descendant of all the royal houses of Europe, and I just don't. It doesn't really mean anything to me. It's just, it confirms for me because, a lot of people that are in the programs have some type of bloodline that's connected to something.
And I'm curious because you're biracial, right?
I'm actually, I don't know. I usually don't talk about it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you don't have to talk about it. I'm just curious
Yeah,
if
I
there
usually
was
don't
an
talk about
like if having your royal Euro family blood mixed with a completely other racial continent has anything to do with the results of what you're able to do in this lifetime. Have you um, thought about that at all?
it. Yeah, and actually, the bloodline that gives me the ability is a demonic bloodline.
It's a demonic bloodline from the Euro royal family.
from at my cellular level, it's a demonic bloodline.
Wow.
It's the
The
jinn. It's
gin.
the jinn. I'm part of the jinn. I'm part of the jinn race. Yeah.
And how did you like? How did you?
Let me talk. I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about
Talk
that so
about
we
it.
can
Yeah,
get
elucidate
let me
more.
get
This
through
is
that.
interesting.
Let me do that. So yeah. Okay. So some of the past lives that I I became known of, I was able to see my past lives. And when I can see past lives, it's not just, and I'm not just looking at it or remembering it. I can literally go and interact with the scene. You can almost, be based on my abilities, I can just, you know, if I'm somebody in a past life, I can send my spirit there and take the body over and kind of experience it with them, which can be traumatic, but at the same time, it's so amazing to be able to do this. So I can see things, with my own eyes, with my own hands. I don't have to ask anybody else. This is, my own information I'm able to get. So some of the past lives, why I think they chose me are some of the ones we found in the playroom and in those hypnosis sessions at the psychiatric hospital. So one of them is in Italy. It was the 1400s. And I was a widow. I had a couple of kids and, my husband had died. So I was trying to make ends meet, and making sure the kids were taken care of, that kind of thing. So in those days, I would be something called a medium. And a lot of people in the village, they would come to me and I would help them. I thought I was helping them, by helping them talk to their loved ones who had passed. If and they would barter with me and they would, bring me extra food and things like that for the work I did. And, I like that. So what happened was the word got around and men came to our village and they came to right to me and, punched me in the face, drug me to a dungeon on a wagon. And my kids had to go with my uncle. And in the dungeon, they just pretty much tortured me, starved me, and they wanted me to admit that I was, consorting with the devil, and I never would because I had no idea what they were talking about. I thought I was a good person. I thought I was helping people, and I was so angry at all these men for all this, what they had done to me and so many other women for nothing. And had a lot of lingering trauma from that, especially since, and I didn't die by fire. I didn't die by fire. I mean, I didn't die by the being burnt at the stake. I died from starvation and dehydration because one of the things that they did is they would hang me from the ceiling by my arms, arms up at the top of the ceiling. And I had hung there for so long, my arms were pretty much dead at that point. Like they were gone. Like they were just pretty much dead arms. And the trauma part is that my uncle, there was a little hole in the dungeon where there was like almost like a mini window. And he had brought my kids there to just see me one last time. And, they had to peek through the little slat. And it was terrible because I was naked and I was tortured and abused and, pretty much hung up by the ceiling and dying. And he brought him there to see me. And it still affects me, the trauma of it from them having to see that. I can't imagine, what they experienced after having to see something like that, in their lives, in their little lives. But I was talking about this on a different show the other day, and I never really say this, but one of the kids that I had in that lifetime is my father in
Oh
this
shit.
life. So we had unfinished business, in a sense. He came back, be based. It's really interesting to have that happen. But that was one life, and sometimes you keep the abilities that you have. That's kind of why I'm still able to do like medium work is because I was a medium before, in a different life. Another life that I had that was important was as I was a male in this life and it looked like it was about 1700s, early 1800s. I can't remember the exact time. And I had been living on the streets a long time, almost like a street urchin or something. I traveled around and I had done really well because I made it to adulthood, and not many people do if you're left alone. My parents had died really young. And I traveled around. I thought it was, good life. Went from village to village looking for work and food and things like that. I met up with another gentleman and we kind of became like good friends, and we had the same type of issue. And our issue was that we were violent and we assaulted and harmed women. And that's what we did. And each village we went to, we would have a target and we would harm them, you know. And I try not to say it the real thing, but harm them till they met their end. So I'm trying to say it in a nice way. We would harm them until they met their end. physically and sexually. And there was one village, we had gotten careless because we thought we were so awesome that we would never be caught. So there was one village we went to, and we had just assaulted a woman, and we left her in a field, because in those days there's a lot of women, out in the fields by themselves doing their work, and it just wasn't a thing back then that you would have to, feel unsafe in your own, village or whatever. But we had left her out in the field, and that was our mistake, because we went to the local pub and we were drinking with some of the villagers, and they knew it was us because we were the only new people that had been in town in, I don't know, probably years. They knew it was us. And we had to run, and we ran to a barn, and we thought we had gotten away, but instead of pulling us out, they just locked us in there and set it on fire. And I remember right before I died, I was trying to climb up high to get into the rafters to get away from the fire, and we died, painful death by fire, rightfully so, because of what we were doing. We deserved every bit that we got. So that's another life that they saw, that they could utilize, that prior violent streak in me, to see if they could use that for something in the future. So that was another one that they saw. This other life I had was really interesting. And I saw myself in Egypt, and I was a male then, and there was so many of us. There was like thousands of us just walking. We were by the pyramids, and we were walking up and down. Everybody was carrying sand, and nobody talked to each other. Nobody looked in each other's face, nothing, no eye contact. It was so strange. When nobody was eating, drinking, nothing. People just walking, moving sand, no noise, just walking and moving sand. And if I could look over at the pyramid, on top of the pyramid, I saw this huge being, and it was the dog man. We called them the dog people. And our people, we said that the dog people came down and killed our god, and that our god was a crocodile. We said that the dog people came and killed him. And so he had taken over our society. And the dog people were trying to get us to build like a temple really quick, and they called it a flash portal. And they wouldn't tell us what it was for. They just said it was forbidden for us to ever use it or know about it or things like that. And so I was a slave in that life, and I ended up dying just on the steps. And that's how we died. You would just exhaust yourself from working and just die wherever you laid down. So I died just on the steps, just like everybody else did at that time. We would just, die after you wore yourself down, because we never ate or drank or anything. You just died until you were done. And that was an interesting life, because in that life, the lesson I learned is that I felt what it was like to be completely controlled, completely. Like I had no life except for what they had told me to do, literally. So that was interesting, and that was a life they felt they could use also, because I was already a slave before. And when they're thinking about when they wanted to create a mind control slave, they saw that in me already and thought that I could be perfect for that, and they could, you know, reuse some of that trauma. And that's what they would do too. They would double seal trauma in you in the MK Ultra programs. So imagine if I had died by fire in a previous life, and then in MK Ultra, they're putting, they would do things like put your hand over a fire and things like that. That's a
Yeah.
double trauma. Or when they were hanging us, when they hung me when I was a medium in Italy, they knew that about that. So they used that in part of their MK Ultra program. They would hang me by ropes, and spin me around, and I'm terrified, I became terrified of heights and things like that. So they saw what the impact would be of using these past life traumas on me, even as a child at age 7. But the one we were talking about, the demonic bloodline. So I wanted to talk about a little bit about harrowing. And this is something that's been given me so much freedom to just be able to acknowledge what I was before. And I can see myself, and it was ancient times. And in those days, is such a different time. I always say that when I was Harlan, she always said it was such a seductive time. It was just different than it was now. And she said, Harlan says that, you know, they needed people like things like her then, because, now we have, if you want to be victimized, you can be victimized by the person next door. But in those days, it wasn't the same. And they said they needed people, to victimize. They needed things to victimize them, the monsters. They had their own monsters and myths and stuff. But now you can just find your monster next door, which is really interesting. She said she told me that's why the gods are dying, because they don't need monsters and, gods anymore, that you can find the monster next door. So I remember seeing myself like walking in a desert because I was following somebody. And this is how I found a target. I would find a target, and that was the person I was going to infiltrate and then
As
oppress.
Harlowing.
So I would begin my oppression. Yes, is a jinn. Yes. And Harlowin, in terms of a physical form, a lot of demonic entities don't like to take a
Hmm.
physical form because they consider themselves gods, elder gods, things like that. They don't, and that's what they say. I'm not saying I consider myself that, or I think of myself that way. I'm just saying that's what they say, is that they consider themselves gods. So when they come in their true forms and people are terrified and disgust, that's not the reception they're expecting when a god comes down to earth. They don't want that. They don't like that. So even as a jinn, I would travel as energy, and I called myself red energy. And actually, a lot of us demonic entities, we travel by the blood, so almost like parasitical energy. So it's a parasite, pretty much. We travel by the blood, and rather than doing some of these other things, it's way easier to travel by blood, anyways. So I would find the mark, and this one gentleman, I found him in the desert. He was just walking, trying to find a sheep or a goat or something. And I just came up behind him, and he can't see me. I'm invisible. I would like creep up behind him, scare him, say crazy, creepy things to him. And I remember feeling so much glee and like excitedness about his fear. It was really interesting to see myself be so excited, like he, like giggling, like a giggle, like a little girl. She was giggling, like she thought it was so fun. And her whole process was to continue to oppress him until he finally just let her take over. And when she takes over, then she would completely destroy his life. She would destroy his life and everyone around him by making him do things, or, you know, but it was a consent for her. She felt like it was a consent because she would only, and I know that a lot of demonic entities can only enter if you say they can. I know people say that it's easy for them to enter. I have never met one that could enter freely. It had to be an invitation. They call it the beckoning.
The
That's the word for
beckoning.
it. They call it the beckoning. When I was a jinn, I called it a heart call. So I felt like, and unfortunately, people do call them. I hate to say it, people call them all the time. Even when I was a jinn, people called me because some people just want to break from their life and they wanted anything to take over for them. And we would describe that as a heart call. That means they want us to be there. They're calling us. They don't want to be in their life anymore. Let's take over. And so you would take over their life, and that was a possession. So I would possess that person if once they let me in. And that's the phrase. If you ever are sleeping at night or having a dream or something and you hear the words "let me in," that's them.
The jinns or demons or
The jinns or demonic
or both.
or both.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, everything seems to be of consent in this realm, and everything bad that can kind of happen to one requires a few mechanisms or steps to let that in. Even
Yes.
like selling one's soul. Everybody's like, "Wow, everyone in Hollywood sells their soul," and it's like a soul transaction is not valid. It's not real. But the
Mhm.
mechanism of the illusion of the transaction invites in that you know, consent and that whole thing.
There's
Yeah.
so many, right. There was so many ways to invite it into your life. That's why I know, I've heard it from a lot of different demonics. You have to be invited.
Um,
But so that was her thing. And what I thought was really interesting is that she told me she didn't know she was evil. She said, she's like, I didn't even know I was evil. I didn't know I was hurting people because that's what I came here to do. And she'd been doing it for thousands of years. She's like, I came here to do this. That was the role I agreed to do. I agreed to be that darkness experience for people. And then they called me and I'd come and I would, bring them the whole experience until they met their end. Or if they didn't meet their end, it was never guaranteed. But she said, what am I doing wrong? That's what they
right.
wanted, So it was really interesting to hear her say that she didn't know that she was part of like a dark side or evil. She just said, I remember her saying, my brothers are the jinn and we are forever. She literally said that. She's like, she didn't know that there was an end to this world. She don't even know how she dies. She doesn't feel like she's dead because I'm still alive. So she's
Do
technically
you
not dead.
consider is it Harlowin? Harlowin? Do you
Yes.
consider
Yes.
Harlowin evil? Because I don't really see it as evil. I see it as an energy that exists in the non-physical form that is necessary, as humanity is such a young species needing to grow and discover who they are, and we live through many incarnations. And so I would see it as something necessary, the polarity, or something necessary for one to gain more awareness of self, even if they end up meeting their end in a negative way, because hopefully that lesson on a soul level comes through in the next lifetime and they're able to work out that shit previously. So what do you think about that?
I can't consider it evil because then that would mean I'm evil, especially since I've been a serial killer in a past life. It's just like I consider myself a good person in this life. I try to help people, but I'm like, I had to be honest. It's gives you so much. It gave me so much freedom to just say, okay, look what I did in these past lives. I can't really say it was either one was evil. I don't, who knows what happened. I know a lot of things happened to me when I was a serial killer. I'd lost my parents young. They had died. I've been on my own. What examples did I have? And it was just really interesting to see, how things turn out and how people have their belief systems. And, of course, I had a belief system too that completely had to change when I was able to access some of these other realms and these other lives. I can't think the same anymore because, I'm experiencing so many different things that nobody else gets to have a chance to see. And Harlowing was just one of those things that I don't know, that's part of her. And she's the demonic bloodline that I consider probably part of that. And once I get into talking about hosting, I can talk a little bit more about that. Um, I should go into it just because it's part of it. We're kind of in this, paranormal
Yeah,
talk right now.
take us
I might as
there
well continue with the
for sure.
paranormal part. Okay. So as kind of when I moved into adult, I'm just going to jump around a little bit. So when I moved into more of like a early adulthood, because of the training I got, and how they found some of these different, entities and things inside me, they had me working for Monarch Solutions, and Monarch Solutions has this like big catalog now, and in part of their catalog, some of them are occult services. So what they had me doing was something called spirit hosting. And that's what I consider myself. I call myself a
Mm-hmm.
host. And actually a demon taught me that word during one of my psychic sessions. He said, "That's what I am. I'm a host. I'm a spirit host." So that's what I call it because it's different from channeling. It's different from just being a medium. I'm literally turning into that thing. I'm letting it take over my body, my fingers, my toes, my legs, everything. I'm not just letting it speak through me. It's taken over. And I can also go in their mind. It's almost like a melding of us. So as an adult, a young adult, they had me doing that spirit hosting and who I would consider like elite families. And there was this one family I remember. I think they're from the East Coast. From what I remember going to their house, beautiful house, and they had purchased a service of spirit hosting for a weekend, and it's pretty expensive. So I know a lot of people don't do it very often. Monarch probably makes a ton of money off this. So what they wanted me to do was come to the house and they treated me very well. I got fed very well, things like that. Sometimes it was just me or sometimes it was me and another person, most likely a male. And if sometimes they wanted us to
As a
spirit host
child,
together. So
adult,
adult
an
at this
alter,
point.
or
hmm
you now in the here and now.
Um, it's my, I guess it's hard to say. It's hard to say because I have an altar that's an occult altar, but also just in my normal body, I can
Right,
do these
right,
things.
right,
So I don't technically need an
right.
altar to do it. This is just an ability
Right.
I have. So what I would go to the house and like I was saying, this family, they had a process that they had met their familiar daemon, and that's what we all call them daemons. We don't see demon, we say daemon. So they had met their familiar daemon in about 1536, I think. And so this is a familiar spirit that had gone down the line generationally with this family, and they felt like this connection to this entity was how they stayed in power and how they had financial success and things like that. So that's what they wanted to do. What they wanted to do, and this was part of the thing I did, is they wanted to kind of like have a night with their god. meet their God, have their God come down. And pretty much they wanted me to just have dinner with them, which sounds really weird, but they were so excited for this. And sometimes they would have other people there for some type of sexual activities, not very often, but sometimes they would do that. But when I was laying there, they had me lay down, and I took off my clothes and things, which I didn't need to take off my clothes to do it. I think that in their mind, they think that they must have saw that on TV that I needed. I don't know where they got these ideas from. I think they watch a lot of TV. So I don't need to take off my clothes to be able to do this. So they had us doing spirit hosting. I laid down and I let this entity take over my body. And this entity was Bacchus. And he's very strong, very old, one of the elder gods. They used to call him Dionysus. He used to be the god of wine in certain, cultures and things like that. But when he came through, he is their familiar daemon. And he came in my body, and I tried to stand up, and it felt like I had 200 pounds on each leg. I could barely walk because he hadn't been in a physical form in so long. It was hard to felt like I was trudging through pounds and pounds of mud trying to get to the table. So they had made this huge like buffet spread, like fancy banquet food. And they wanted to eat with me. So they wanted to eat dinner with their god. So I sat there and I started they didn't realize, I don't know what they thought. Like I started just ripping and tearing at food like an animal and making animal sounds because, Bacchus he's not human. He doesn't act like we do. He doesn't know table manners. So I don't know, but he was not happy. I know Bacchus was not happy with the way they looked at him, looked at me and looked at him, because they had their kind of jaws open because it wasn't what they expected. I don't know what they thought when they thought they called their god down, that what he was going to be like, but it wasn't what they expected. I was just eating like an animal. And then they were asking goofy question that he wasn't happy about. They were asking him like questions that you would ask a regular psychic on Earth. He was not happy about that. He doesn't I know recently he told me that he doesn't even want these followers anymore, and he's kind of disconnect himself from these people because they didn't give him the proper reverence. They didn't show him the proper respect. They're not being proper followers. They're not doing, rituals and things like that. But the rituals that he's requiring is not, you know, um, the darkest ritual you can find. His rituals are more like, showings of like food and jewelry and stuff that they did like in the old days. Like that's kind of what they're talking about. He doesn't know how they kind of got to where they're doing, the crazy rituals. He doesn't really know where
Wow.
that came from. He's like, I don't ask for any of he's back as said, I don't ask for that. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for loyalty,
Wow.
devotion. I'm not looking for you to harm other people in my name. There are some that do want that. I've met one, but not him. So he he was pretty upset about that, and he didn't think that was cool. But anyways, I was gonna say that another part of it is that Bacchus, he was one of the first entities that reached out to me without me being, you know, under a trance or during a psychic session. He was the first one that just reached out to me just as me as a normal person. And he gave me his name over and over. And I've never heard of this before. I didn't know what a Bacchus was. I didn't know what it meant. So I had to look it up to even see what it was, which was really interesting. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, okay. I see what's happening here, kind of. And it's because Bacchus considers me his progeny. He considers me his daughter. He says he's my dark father, kind of in a way. And why did he think like that? He said it's because my father hosted him while I was
Mm.
conceived.
Mm,
So he thinks he's my
mhm.
father. So this is really strange, but if I ever have any issues during sessions, and it doesn't happen very often, once in a while, like I'll have, a lower level spirit that might be a little violent. He even hears me say Bacchus one time, it sounds like 1,000 thundering buffaloes coming towards me. Like I can't I couldn't when it first happened, I couldn't believe that I heard like and I really heard it in my head like 1,000 buffaloes coming towards me. Like if all I had to do was think his name once, and he knew I was in trouble and he came. Because if it's in his realm, he's there. He's like, if it's in one of the astral realms, he can, that's easy for him to travel. He'll go there quickly. So he showed up really quickly just in case. It was crazy to even hear all the buffalo. And it's just so strange that he took that form too, like I don't know, like a bull, like almost like a bull, a charging bull. So he takes that form of a bull when he comes to like rescue me if he needs to. So that's kind of how, sometimes that demonic bloodline comes through is because something like that. And I do know some of these families, there's quite a few. I mean, I know it sounds weird, but there are quite a few that do this. And when they think that if two people are spirit hosting and one of their members of their family has sexual relations with one of these people, if there is a pregnancy that results, they feel like they're building an army of antichrist that way, because they feel like the child would be like part of a demonic bloodline or have some type of connection to one of those beings because of that. Because you're literally, if Bacchus is inside me, and then somebody had relations with me, it's almost like having relations with Bacchus.
Yeah.
So they wanted, and that's one of the things they wanted to do. They wanted to eat with Bacchus. Sometimes they wanted to try to have sex with him and things, and he does not like that. He thinks that's disrespectful, because he doesn't feel like he's on our level in a way, which is, their minds, they think they're gods, like I said. So that's kind of how that comes about. I kind of skipped around. I can. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Is any
very,
question
very
before I
interesting
go
that
on?
you would serve yourself up as a vessel or an intermediary in this way, and it's very interesting to get a sense of your idea of the spectrum. There's good, there's evil, there's
Yeah.
everything, there's light, there's dark, and there's kind of everything in between. And you seem to
hmm
straddle, or in your multiple incarnations, straddle both aspects of that.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I want to make sure people know that I was forced to do this through MK Ultra. I don't have a choice. If Especially working under Monarch Solutions or Kruger or something like that, you don't have a choice. If they say I have to do this, I had to go. There was no, I didn't. It's always threat of death if you don't
Oh,
want to do
wow.
something. So I didn't want to go down that road. So I never did. But I was going to skip back to age 13. I wanted to get back to some of that. So at around age 13, they had decided they wanted me to do additional training. So they had me with a chaperone who was kind of like, I don't know, a fancy gentleman. He was very dressed up and he wore a hat and everything. I wasn't around those types of people that much because of the way I grew up, but I had a chaperone and he took me on a train. And the train almost was like this really fast moving, like underground train or subway or something. I don't know really. I was only 13. I hadn't been very many places. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't really ask questions. I know not to ask questions. But when we arrived at where we were going, it was on the moon, and it was level 4 underground. So level 4 underground of the moon base is where they're doing a lot of training, and specifically I was doing psionics training, on that specific level. And one of the really cool things or validating for me is so they wanted me to do personality profiling. So they had some of their classrooms in that level 4 were kind of like very old looking, and there was obviously no windows or anything being underground, but I remember seeing a poster on the wall during that time frame, and it said that the general that was in charge of that base, during that time, his name was General Land, and he was being retired after 20 years of service, and they were having a banquet for him. So I always remembered that poster. I thought it was really weird to see that.
Wow.
So the instructor I had, there was other adults in the classroom. I was the only kid, and the instructor was not happy about having a kid in her classroom. She thought it was kind of, I don't know, cheapening the training or something. But because I came from special sector, and everybody who's been in SSP or one of these other programs, there's a file on you, and some people have something in their file that says special sector. So if you have that stamp in there, if somebody says you got to take this person in for training, you have to. There's something about it that they can't say no if I need to do something. So I started to do personality profiling, and the instructor, she was very stern, very assertive, kind of like almost like over authoritarian with me. I didn't have a good time there. There was nothing to do there. You just went to training, you went to your room, same thing every day. And she taught me really well though. And it was almost just, I don't know how I say this. She was scary in a way because, scary in a way because she was so rude to me. But she always told me that she wanted to make sure that it was like, she always said this phrase. She said, "It's got to be one look and one word." She said, "I had to be that fast because if I was going to be going somewhere and doing a mission or job, I had to be quick, to keep myself safe." And I kind of appreciate now that she was so strict with me, because I think she kept me alive by making sure I was fast, just like a little mouse. You get in and you get out quickly without being seen. So she wanted me to go into any situation. She said I had to be that quick where if I shook somebody's hand, I had to know what they were thinking. I had to know what they're about. If I saw somebody blink, I had to be able to tell by their blink of their eye what they're, what this kind of person is. There's so many different things you can see in a person that can tell what kind of person they are. It's very weird that, just the way somebody sits, the way somebody breathes, the way they, touch their face, everything is a tell. I think it's really interesting that everything is a tell. So she had me doing that for a while in personality profiling. So I guess I got good at it. And, in my, they didn't really use, I don't have memories about the programs from like 13 to 19. I'm not, from what I was told, doing my sessions, is that I looked too young at that age to do what they wanted me to do. And it's true, I did look when I was 13, I probably looked like I was 8 or 9. So I probably needed time to mature for what they wanted me to do. And they wanted me to get into beta work, which is more kind of like what they consider that old school kind of like honeypots thing, or, something like that. I called it beta tracking. That's the real word for it. So in beta tracking, I did in young adulthood, I would do something called like, if they would send me information on a target or a mark. I called them a mark. And you would infiltrate that person's life, and turn on, pretty much you turn on your recording. A lot of these were intel gathering jobs, intelligence. So you would kind of like create a relationship with this person, and you'd be recording the whole time. I have an altar that does, has a photographic memory, so they record. And that's the way that they keep their information safe. Because if I were to get caught and interrogated for any reason, they'd never be able to get the information because it's not in the front of my mind. They would have to do a real deep hypnosis search to be able to be debriefed on some of that information. So it's a way to keep the information safe. They won't be able to find it. It's under lock and key in my brain. So they would do a lot of that intelligence gathering, and that's beta tracking work where you start a relationship. There's a lot of Black Widow programming, where if the mission called for something darker to happen, they would have that. They would have you do something like that. But I kind of did a lot of that. And then after I did a lot of beta tracking work around age 28, 29, I ended up getting a promotion, and they said it was for a job well done. So they sent me to Mars, where I was going to be doing human resources work on the McCreary base. So the base I was on Mars was called McCreary, and it was in the South Canal region. It was right near a loading dock for some of the incoming ships. And my specific division was Division Mariner. So that's who I worked under, is Division Mariner. And the general I worked under, his name was Asher. So the job I had, I would bring some of the new recruits into my office, and I would spend about an hour with them. I would do a lot of different assessments, and my assessments were basically, observing the person, making them talk so I could observe their body language, and that's how I would read them. And that's how I would choose the specific job that they would go into, is by doing some of these, basic assessments.
Uh,
So I was doing that for a while, and
I
oh, go
was
ahead. Did you
gonna
have a
I was
question?
gonna just ask, can you almost telepathically pick up when somebody's about to ask you a question? Because when you said, I did human resources work at this base, and I'm just like, what did that entail? And I just thought that in my mind, and then immediately you just kind of go into that. So I just thought that was really interesting. But
It's some It's I mean, I have telepathy, but it's mild. I call it mild telepathy because it's not like where I'm like full on, but that's also like, I don't know. I practice like doing palm readings and stuff for people because I just want to, test myself, and I'm pretty accurate. But the thing is, me holding their hand, I'm using telepathy. I'm not really reading the lines in their palm. I don't tell them
yeah.
no, but it's telepathy. I'm just because there's stuff that I say that there's no way I could know, and it's because I'm getting it from them and from their head. So I just don't want to scare them, so I don't tell them. But it's mild telepathy. I don't consider myself full blown. When I did on the moon, there was, full on telepaths in the classroom with me. I'm more of like a mild telepath. So in human resources, like I said, I would have the new recruits. And in those days when I was doing it, I think it was like 90s, early 2000s, they were still doing some trauma-based mind control, but a lot of the recruits were voluntary. They were coming from our own military on the Earth, and they were just telling people they were going overseas, and they were just coming to Mars for a tour. They were doing a tour on Mars. And I think they kind of got excited because we're going to Mars. We're going to be fighting aliens and giant spiders and bugs and just like, Starship Troopers. And it's nothing. It was nothing like that. When they came in my office, I put them in a job. Look, we had different divisions like water treatment, waste treatment, sewage, mining, drilling. We had an entertainment division, all those. They would be in something like that. They would be doing something to keep the base running. So it wasn't exactly what they thought was going to be happening. So I was doing a lot of that human resources work, and I didn't have a good time on Mars. I was miserable there. And nobody liked me. I was very kind of like on the outside of everyone because I was kind of like working for the man, and nobody wanted to be around me. I don't blame them. And part of my job when they came in my office is to use my abilities to detect if somebody was going to challenge the status quo, because that was a huge deal on this base. They cannot have any type of rebellion to their mission values and to their ideology of the base. And a lot of it is built on power, conquest, and control. That's it. You don't do anything but that. If they tell you to do something, they wanted to keep it very tight there. So if I felt like somebody with my, using telepathy or whatever was going to be a rebel in some way, I had to make sure people knew about it. And so that was kind of like, I don't know, I guess people consider that like treachery or something. I'm not quite sure. It was my job. So I did that for a really long time. And I ended up, this was really weird. I ended up kind of getting demoted because I was starting to have issues. I was having issues like just, I think I was having bleed through memories of whatever kind of life I had before. I just was having and it was really weird because in 2018, that's how I started to get my memories back, as I got a job doing human resources work, and I had no idea it was similar to what I was doing on Mars, and it just blew my brain open. It blew everything open for me. So now I can understand why while I was on Mars, I was having bleed through. Who knows how that works? A bleed through, bleed through. It was really weird. It's strange. So
Could you have a
I was
future
having that.
bleed through, you think, or like bleed through to previous or different incarnation?
Oh no, I consider the time on Mars a direct experience in this
Oh,
lifetime. I consider it this
for
lifetime,
sure. But that
definitely.
maybe that bleed in was that Mars to later moment or Mars to prior moment?
It could. I can't even tell. That's how that's how
Wow.
complex it is. I can't tell. But I so on Mars when I was on the base, I just knew something was wrong, and I was doing weird stuff. Like I didn't accidentally. I purposely went into my the general's office and I was looking through his things. And of course, he's not going to have anything just sitting out. But I just knew something. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And I always say this, like, it sounds weird, but we didn't have a word for depressed, but I think I was experiencing like major depression on Mars, but we didn't have a word for it. You weren't allowed to be depressed there. So I didn't know how to deal with that. So I ended up getting demoted and I ended up having to work for like on incoming ships for the rest of my time, like, and I worked on a satellite station for a little bit, and the satellite station was kind of like a medical satellite station where they were doing like augments, physical and chemical augments for people, some of the soldiers. And they just had me like going in the room and getting consents. They take consents very seriously. In the faction I work for, I was under Mars Defense Force. They take the consent very seriously. So even if you're, so now that I'm out and been out for a really long time, there's still signatures of me saying I agree to certain things, still. And actually, Mars Defense Force, they use an outside contracted group to take care of their kind of like records that keep their records safe. So they use an offsite, agency to keep their records, which I think is really smart. So people don't try to get into those. So I ended up working for this cargo ship, just signing off on things. And it was really weird because I didn't really have any friends there. I didn't really talk to a lot of people, but I do remember one thing. I ended up having a relationship with one of the guys that worked on a cargo ship. And I always remembered this because it stuck in my mind that he would bring cargo back, but one of the times he brought me this really amazing gift, and it was a contraband item. It was a little Debbie snack cake, one of those raspberry
Mhm.
zingers. He brought me that from Earth, and it was contraband, so he had to hide it somehow and get it back to me. But I thought it was better than a diamond ring because something in my mind, it must have been familiar to me. I think those people in the cargo ships must know a lot because they probably see a lot more than we get to if we're stuck on Mars. They're bringing back, a lot of different things. You're not supposed to have that because it reminds people of Earth, and that could get a bleed through memory right there. And it did. As soon as I saw that, there was just something there. I knew it. So at the end of my 20 years, I ended up just going into retirement. And in MDF, we called it retirement. When you were done with your 20 years, you would be age regressed. And from what I remember, the time I was there, they were using chemicals to do it. So I had mine by chemicals. And before you left the program, there's tons of papers you had to sign. You had to make sure that they had everything in order. So there was a lot of forms that we had to sign, and everybody signed. And part of that was their way to keep you under control even after you leave. So you consent to be controlled and monitored for the rest of your life. And part of the form says, upon reaching this agreement, I will comply with all standards and executions necessary and written by the whole of the law, and that any failure to comply with mission values will result in termination. And termination doesn't mean being fired, it means a real termination. So you literally sign for that. You sign saying, if I don't do what you say, you can kill me anytime. We sign
Wow.
that before you leave. You sign it. You sign yourself to be controlled by like a handler program before you
Wow.
leave. You give consent to
Although,
that.
like, that type of contract is kind of null and like you can revoke consent to a contract like that, right?
You would think so. You think so. But from what I was told, these contracts, they specifically word them in a certain way so they hold up in all courts, including Earth and galactic and any other planet. And they say that it's because they want to make sure that it can stand up to shifts in diplomacy. I remember the exact statement they told me. It has to stand up with shifts in diplomacy. So they say that these hold up in all courts. I don't know. I've never been to court for this, but that's what I've been told. That
Why
that
do you
hands up
feel why do you
holds up
feel okay in sharing that with us here?
because the world needs to know.
Awesome. I respect that.
And there's the world needs to know this is the whole point of this. I was going to say at the beginning that I should have said this at the beginning, but my father gave me a strict, kind of message, and for me and for the rest of the community. He told me, and he's in the spirit world, so this message is from the spirit world. He said to burn it down. He said burn the system down. He said go out there and tell everybody what they did and what they made us do. And so this is the reason I do it for him. I stay true to that when he told me to do that. He said, "This is what you need to do. Go and tell them what they did." And that's what I do. I tell people what they did.
That's wonderful because I think much like all of our Mario's experience, mine, yours, that there are similar threads where secrecy, power over others, and stuff of this nature
Mhm.
is kind of a delicate house of cards, and it requires all our upkeep, and that can be weaponized through fear, through compliance, through blackmail, through heaven knows what, and yeah,
So
yeah,
much.
and all it takes.
How much time do we have
Oh,
left? Yeah, how much time do we have left? I know
we're
we were
aiming
getting
for another
close.
half hour. Does that feel okay with you?
About
Yep.
20, 30 minutes. Yeah, I just wanna make sure. I wanna make sure we talk about these are 2 topics I always have to make sure because 'cause they're the newest ones, Project Oblivion and the Olympia Group. I wanna make sure I talk about those before we, go off the air. Those are really
Yeah,
important
let's hop in.
topics. But
I'm intrigued by the word Olympia
okay.
Group. That seems like
Yeah.
Yes. So the Olympia Group. So this was something that happened to me, and I wasn't at Montauk or anything. I was in a different program, so I didn't necessarily get that high level time travel or anything that some of the survivors talk about. But this particular experience, I feel it was a direct experience for me, and I only remember being taken to a small base, and when I got to the base, there was two, women with me, and I didn't feel threatened by them or anything. They're the ones that brought me there. And when I got to the base, it was very, I don't know, everything looked murky, almost like a eternal night. But I don't know if that was fog or some kind of chemicals or anything. And so there was it was a base, and there was a general there that I was supposed to talk to. And when I talked to the general, he said the base is not ready to be known, and his name is not ready to be known, which is fine. But what he told me is that it's a very important message, and he's about 12 to 15 years in the future. And he said, in those times, there's a revolution on the horizon. It's gotten really bad from where we are now to 15 years from now. He said it's really bad. He said they have a small group that are kind of like the rebellion, the network, and they're trying to, move forward, and, and they're not winning. It looks really bad for humanity. So what he told me, and what he tasked me and the rest of the disclosure network to do, told me to bring back the message that, about, for one thing, he wanted me to know about the Olympia Group. And the Olympia Group, they're kids right now, they're about 9 to 19 years old. So small range of age range. But he said that they all came here together at the same time, the volunteers for this. And he said these kids are very important. Right now, these kids are very young, but he's like, these are the computer kids, the hackers. And he said the reason why they're so important for the revolution is that about 15 years in the future, pretty much a lot of fighting is done with technology. And he said they're the ones, if they can stay alive, they're the ones that are going to turn the tides of this war, around for the revolution. And he said, if we don't have that hacker unit, we're pretty much going to be done. He's like, he said, it's a very important message. He said, to protect these children, they must stay alive at all costs. He said, at all costs, to protect them, make sure these kids stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
So this is his message for all of us. This is from the general in the revolution. He told the disclosure network, and I told him, I was like, what can I do? I'm just a girl. What do you want me to do? And he's like, this is yours now. You take it back to the disclosure network, and you tell them we have to build the network, maintain the network, and protect the Olympia Group. It's a job and a mission that he's tasked us with. The general. This is a general from the future that literally told us to build our network here and, keep it going. So it's such an important message. And I don't think it's crazy to say protect children. It's been such, you know,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I think when people hear the story, sometimes they're like, time travel. But it's like, he's saying this is so important for us and protect these children. Children have been abused for so long, and we haven't really made a lot of headway in protecting them. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
truth. I'm sorry to say we haven't done it. We haven't done a good job at protecting them. It's important now because our whole race is going to die out from whatever's going on if we don't do it. So it was a very important. And what is really strange is the people that are in charge here on Earth, they know who these kids are, and they're going to be targeting them in some way to throw them off
Yeah.
course. He tried to give me like an image of like one of the little girls. She's like 15 right now. They're gonna, not him, but the people in charge here on Earth, the bad guys. I don't know how you describe it. I don't even know what to describe it as, but the people in control, they're gonna try to throw her off course by making her a
Mm-hmm.
drug addict, so she won't have the ability to, be in her best self for the
Yeah.
revolution. So it's amazing. It's like such a huge message, and it's so hard, when I talk about it. I get so like nervous because it's like so important. I hope I'm doing it
Well,
justice, by the way he told me to
I
say
think
it,
I think the mere mechanism of doing it is powerful in and of itself, because the most amazing weapon that you wield is not some fancy sword or a space gun. It is this thing right here, your throat chakra, and your mere utterances.
The voice.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, watch the ripples form just by your mere act here. So
And that's what my father's and the general said. He said, this is a war of words. It's a war of information right now. This is our job. You tell people about what they did. And this is how we're going to you know, make a lot of progress, is by making this more normalized and for more people to know about it. And that's where Project Oblivion came in. So part of the thing that I can do when I'm, under trance or doing some of these psychic sessions and doing the spirit hosting is I've been able to infiltrate not only secret bases and their secret documents, but literally talk to the handler division. So the handler division is called the aftercare program. That's what they call themselves. They have different agencies around the world to do this work. And one of the agencies I know one of them is called the Princeton Agency. Um, But these individuals, they were trained also in MK Ultra to be handlers. So they're not that much different from us, and they're not so scary. These are kind of like some of those nerds that sit behind the computer all day and they're attacking us just with the computer. They have all the technology they could ever need to harm us at the fingertips. So they do a lot of it by the remote. I call them the remote handlers. So that's what I say. So,
And this is part of
and a
Project
lot of them are
Oblivion.
total jerks. It's 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 connected to it, but the handler division was there before Project Oblivion. Project Oblivion is new. So the handler division has been there since you come out of the secret space program and you sign the paper saying you consent to be controlled and monitored for the
Right.
rest of your lives. You will have somebody that takes over to do that to you and to infiltrate your life and to ensure that you have a hard and difficult life. So, and most of these guys, they have like a caseload of about 33 people that they monitor, and they're
Yeah.
paid very well. Because I've actually been into one of their houses. I snuck in when I was remote viewing. I snuck into my own handler's house. I was in there and I crept up behind him and I kind of just put my spirit hands on his shoulders. Just that's kind of like I do that. I put my spirit fingers on somebody's shoulders just to kind of start it. And he is a telepath. He knew I was there, and I knew he knew. And so I looked over his shoulder to see what he was doing, and he was typing. And as soon as I put my fingers on his shoulder, he said the asset is combative and presenting with ill intentions. And he typed out that measures will need to be taken and that he was going to implement a measure for tremors and for the spleen, which is really weird because they can even affect your health. They have a lot of different machines. There's a machine called the Wasp that they
The
use.
say that
There's
again.
one called the
It's
Green
called the what?
Devil, the Wasp.
Wasp. Okay.
So the Wasp, if they use it on you, you're going to be totally effed up. It's it totally so misaligns your chakras. It's an energetic kind of machine that you would have every mystery illness. They'll never find the cause for it because there is no cause. It was
Hmm.
technology. You won't find the cause for it. So some of these people with mystery illnesses and they're thinking they don't know what it is,
Can I
the
ask
Wasp.
why it's
And
called
then
the
the Green
Wasp?
Devil. Oh, go ahead.
Why is it called the why is
Why
it
is it
called the Wasp?
No clue, that's just what they named it. And they have another machine called the Green Devil that the handlers use, and the Green Devil does, something called it will flood your body with adrenaline. So you go into panic mode, and they'll do this at the most inopportune times, like, if I'm at imagine me at work in an office, trying to meet with the client or somebody, and they flood me with adrenaline. I'm in a fight or flight, act like a lunatic trying to get away, and they do that purposely. It's almost like a psychological measure, to do something like that because then you look
Hmm.
crazy. That's what they want us to look like. They want us to look crazy. They want us to be hurt. They want us to be in physical pain constantly. They want to because if they say that's the easy part. They could say the handler even told me he's like all I have to do is press a button and you're done. Like it's nothing to
Hmm.
me.
Wow.
So they're all monitoring all of us. And so Project Oblivion was a recent thing, especially after I talked to the general from the future. Project Oblivion, they they know Project Oblivion even knows who the Olympia Group is. They're a new program. And what they're going to do is they're not happy with how much information we've got out. They're not happy that we've kind of built up the movement to where people are believing us. People are seeing this as a reality and it's becoming more normalized and we're just becoming believable now. That back in, maybe some years back, it wasn't so believable. It was kind of like more of a paranormal subject or, in the, alien type topics. They weren't believing us like they are now. And so they know that, and they created Project Oblivion, which is going to be where they're going to come with harsher attacks to us. And one of the groups, I always tell people this, so they need to be on the watch. The group that they're going to be targeting, one of the hardest groups to target is the podcasters, because they say some of these disclosure podcasters are giving survivors a platform to speak. And that's how we've kind of gotten into this fear of being able to get the information out is because of podcasters helping us get this
Hmm.
information out. So it's become a huge target for Project Oblivion. So people need to stay aware, and keep watch, of whatever,
Yeah.
everything because of this. They don't want you to help people get information out. They don't want this, and it's, your choice if you want to do it, but it's it's a big to me, it's like, "F you, I'm gonna keep doing it. I'm gonna
Yeah,
keep talking."
that's my
You
that's
know? That's my mission. That's my mission. I can't stop it just because. because you've already targeted me for my whole life and, kept me sick and, done all those things already to
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah,
So, I already know how that
quiet. Yeah,
feels.
quiet.
So I'm going
Quiet
to,
compliance does not is not a great reward. Like your quiet compliance was torturous. So this sort of like,
yep,
you better not say something or I'm gonna get real angry with you. It's just like this doesn't mean anything. It's like I'm locked in an abusive
yeah.
basement and I need to GTFO and use my throat chakra and let it just radiate out. So I'm very proud of. I thank you for the warning. Vigilance is always good and justified, but I kind of join you in this sort of idea of anybody coming at us saying like, "Oh, you better not." I'm a little bit like,
They do.
yeah,
They try it. They've done it to me a million times. You that was kinda like one of the first experiences I had when I was first getting a memory. Back in 2018, I was starting a meditation practice because that was part of my journey. I wanna get my mind quiet so I can let things kind of flow in, and as soon as I started to shift conscious a little, it would be V2K, and the V2K was very aggressive, and they told me, and I'm not even kidding. It was exactly clear and it was perfect mental message. It was not auditory, which I think is interesting. I didn't hear it in an auditory way. And some people will say, well, that's schizophrenia. No, schizophrenics hear in auditory hallucinations. This was not an auditory hallucination. It was a mental message. And it literally said, you come any closer, we'll take everything
Yeah.
from you. It's
wow,
plain as day. Said that just because of meditation. That's how
Yeah.
scared they are of the information we have. If they're afraid of us to meditate, we have important
Mm-hmm.
information that needs to get out to the world. Everything is important. The Olympia Group's important. Project Oblivion's important. The revolution in the horizon, that's important. That's only 15 years away. And they wanted to make sure we knew that, this is our time for like kind of like battle. This we're not the warriors here. We're setting the stage for the next generation. Because kind of we're getting a little older. Our kind of time is kind of over for that, you know, but we're setting the stage and keeping these kids ready, and safe to take over from where
Oh,
we
yeah.
left off. So it's a really important message. And, you know, just like saying we have to build a network here. And that's another thing Project Oblivion doesn't want in terms of building the network. They think that, when people are connecting and talking and chatting about their experiences, they know that's building a network. And that's what the general wants us to do, to build the network. So they don't want any of that. They don't want us to build this network. So they have a couple of programs. They're running there's a company called Roundtree, and they have a software program called SpiderTracks.
Ground
And
tree or
SpiderTracks is
round tree?
using
Round
round
tree.
tree.
Okay.
It's like round and then tree. And they are using SpiderTracks, a program called SpiderTracks. And SpiderTracks, supposedly from what I was told, is they're tracking all of the connections in this movement that we're making. So if I message one of you guys and talk about an experience I have, they're tracking that. They're tracking all of who we're talking to. So they know who's part of our network. They know who all of us are. If we're deciding to be part of the network and get information out, they know who we
Mm-hmm.
are. So I mean, I know it totally sounds like, crazy Terminator information, but that's the information I was given. And like I said, I told the general myself, I'm not young. I'm not, I'm just a little mouse. Like, what am I going to do? And he's, pretty much he said there, and we asked, where are the white hats out? What are they doing? He's like, there are no white hats.
Yeah.
You are it. Take it over. You guys have to take it over. So he's talking about us. He's talking about you guys, me, you. He said, we're the white hats now. They're gone. There's nothing for them to, we have to take it. And that's why he said he worked so hard and waited so long for me to be able to do what I can do to get this message back to everyone. So I guess I don't know. I got the chills when I said that. So I don't know why it's such a difficult process, but he told me, he's like, I've waited so long for you to be able to get this message. You traveled so far for this. He said, you got to take this message back to everyone and let them know what's going on here in this time period and what they need to do there to make sure that it doesn't come to fruition. So during that session, I had like a spirit type of guide ish come through. And she said the likelihood of that timeline is about 38%. I mean, it's not too high, but it's not too low either. That we have to put some measures and things in place to ensure that that percentage gets very
30,
low.
38. Okay, I get it. I do have to say some
Yeah.
things about the Olympia project because it very much
Yeah.
aligns with what I've been saying for the past several years, astrologically. And I've been studying and practicing astrology for like going on 17, 18 years. And one of the things that I've
Mhm.
come to understand over the time on my own was that we're just guardians, that we're not
Yes.
really it. And we've kind of been, at least from what I've observed, like a lot of us been conditioned to think that we are it. We are the ones. We are the ones that are going to like
Yeah.
ascend and all of that. But what I've actually come to understand is no, we're the guardians, and we are some very badass, powerful warriors. But we are top elite warriors in order to guard and protect the generations that are born
Yes.
now, and we have to maintain a certain level of integrity and values in place and build infrastructure for when these children come of age, they will begin to seek, and they will be so advanced that they will know when they come across something that they're seeking is real and true, and they will align to those things, and they will be able to find themselves in a community and in a structure that will allow them to really discover their gifts, who they are, what their purpose are. And so I've been saying this astrologically for a long time, and that age group that you're talking about, 9 to 19 years old, aligns with the Pluto and Capricorn generation, which are going to be the next CEOs, the next rulers of everything. But then we also have the Pluto and Aquarius generation that are being born now and and for the next 20 years. And these kids born, you know, now Pluto Capricorn generation, Pluto Aquarius generation, yeah, they're going to be coming into this world very advanced, very powerful, but
Yeah, they are.
a lot of what they're capable of doing is going to be sort of safely sealed away and protected until they come of age. And astrologically, we don't come of age until after our very first Saturn return, which is right around the age 28 to 30 years old. So these kids,
Okay.
and so like if you know these kids being born now, not, let's say they're 9 years old, 15 years later, that's when they're coming of age, right? And so it makes
That
a
makes
lot of
sense.
sense. And
Yeah.
so this is what you're saying really aligns with what I've been saying about astrology for a very long time. And now that Pluto is in Aquarius, okay, Aquarius is the sign of the genius, technology, quantum mechanics, alien, space, galactic, high level intelligence and genius energy with technology and all that sort of stuff. Well, in order to really understand how the impacts of Pluto and Aquarius are going to be, we also have to consider what is the opposite sign of Aquarius. And the opposite sign of Aquarius is Leo. And Leo is the sign is the sign that represents children, childlike energy, expression, creativity, and the heart. And so Pluto is the planet of death, transformation, and rebirth. Pluto governs the underworld and is the gatekeeper of all things that are kept hidden and secret. So while Pluto is going to be in Aquarius for the next 20 years, there is going to be a lot of increased intensity and also exposure of things happening through AI and the dark web and all of the nefarious ways through media and technology that children are being targeted, because children are the most vulnerable. And we are in a day and age where the common family, the common parent are so busy in the rat race and in the things that they need to do to keep up, that it's become the normal thing to do to just hand your child a tablet. But you don't know what is being designed in their entertainment, in the video games. And so you're very much right, and the general is very much right. We have to protect the children. And I've also been saying this for a long time through the astrology, because with Pluto and Aquarius, the level of targeting and weaponization of technology to attack the most vulnerable open minds is going to
Yes.
be through children. And we have to protect them in so many different ways. And one of the things that I've even written in an article a couple of years ago was that, and it's very sad and unfortunate, but because of this, we are going to see a high level increase of child suicidal ideation and actual child suicide. And we're also going to begin the mass consciousness of the world is also going to begin to become more aware of what is really happening in the dark web, because the common person has no idea how to access the dark web and doesn't even think of the dark web daily or even ever unless it's brought up in some other way. Well, with Pluto moving through Aquarius, it's going to start leaking just exactly how much lucrative black market business is transacting throughout the entire world through the black web, and there's people stationed everywhere. And also going along the lines about the true revolution, this is another thing that I've been saying as well, is we're not there at the true that's what I've been telling everybody, is like, we're not there yet. It's not even prime time. It's not go time. We're not there yet. Everything that has been happening so far is for us, the warriors. The final hoorah stretch is to do as much fucking spiritual, genetic, DNA healing as possible, so that way we're clear and we can be more present with the new generations that are going to be coming in, that are not burdened with the karma that we had to do to clear that
Yes.
out and make the space for them. And the revolution, so revolutions very much align when Uranus goes into Gemini. And we're about to have Uranus in Gemini for a brief moment this year. Uranus will retrograde back into Taurus. But by the time we're in 2026 and 2027, because information, right? We're talking about information. We're talking about speaking and platforms and podcasts and sharing the truth. Gemini is the messenger of the zodiac. Gemini is the twins. Gemini governs communications, information, processing, and discovering and discerning through all of the different informations and finding out what is the truth. Well, Uranus is the planet of sudden shock and random energy, like sudden shock and randomness, unpredictability, and unstable agitation, and is lightning, right? So every time Uranus goes into Gemini, what happens within the collective consciousness is that undeniable truths and realizations surface within the consciousness of humanity, that then strikes revolution, because we then realize that a lot of our matrix that we are in is actually a prison, and it stirs up a war. And so, like, we're really on the precipice of a revolution happening, an industrial technological revolution happening, all while some of the most advanced beings entering this world are coming. And like you said, with Project Oblivion, they know who these children are. They know who the parents of these children are. And you're absolutely right. I very much align with everything you're saying about that. We need to protect the children. And beyond just talking and platforms and podcasts, one of the things that I've been thinking about for like years is, well, how do we do this? How do we build safety nets? How do we build infrastructures? How do we come together? And one of the things my wife and I started was a nonprofit, and I don't know what that might grow into the future, but the seeds and the foundation is there, and there's a lot of work and also like targeting and distractions that kind of pull us away from really flourishing it. But yeah, I think there's, us having these conversations and people listening to it is very important. And I hope that, having these conversations plants the seeds in the consciousness of people to really begin to understand that beyond just talking about it, there is action that's going to have to be put in place. And I also wonder about the sort of shift in how far our community of disclosure and the truth and spirituality are going to advance when I don't know what your take is on cryptocurrency, but there are certain avenues through cryptocurrency when the timing is right, where we are expected to access an extreme amount of abundance. So one of the things that I've been really curious about is, for example, XRP is supposedly one of these coins that are designed for the light. It is alignment with source consciousness, and it's only a matter of time where XRP is going to skyrocket, and we're going to see a huge increase in millionaires, billionaires all over the place from their investments. And part of, because of how much XRP is in alignment with source consciousness and the light and the amount of people that are do-gooders and want to live a life of purpose and meaning and mission. When we come into access of that wealth with XRP, like that's another stage of this whole process that I'm seeing within this 15-year foresight of us really being able to turn the tides and establish our own communities and our own cities and stuff like that. But you've given us a lot to think about here as throughout everything you've said, and there's so many things I'd like to respond and ask questions and hear more about, but we are kind of coming towards the end of a time.
Yeah, we can
I'd
always do a
love
part 2 at some point, yeah, and get into more paranormal topics and things. I have tons of information.
Yes, I would really love for Alex to introduce you to his past life and his most recent past life, and to show you the videos he has, and to go into that because it's very much in alignment with MK Ultra and targeting and things of that nature. And with your awakening, or the memories starting to come back in 2018. I looked at your chart there. I won't talk about it here live. It's because it's your personal chart. But there were things that were intensely activating you during that time in 2018. But also that was around the same time where I really started to kind of break out of my conditioning and begin to remember. And
Mhm.
with the V2K messages, one of the things that I was getting very intensely was shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up,
Yes,
shut the
exactly.
fuck up, shut the fuck up. Like for a long time. And it was exactly that, shut the fuck up. You better shut the fuck up. And it was like really intense.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
that's
never,
exactly how they talk.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And it happens almost every time I do a podcast too, where afterwards they're like, you better
Mhm.
shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up. Delete it, delete it.
Oh, yeah.
Too late.
But
It's already
pay
out
them,
there.
yeah, pay them no
Yeah.
mind. Yeah,
No, I know.
exactly.
Yeah, I don't. Obviously,
Too late.
Yeah,
we're here, but it is an ongoing thing. Yeah,
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 for sure. Oh, no, this is great. I think this is the first of a few, quite a few conversations. I think it was really fabulous to connect with you, and you were such a natural at this. You just kind of let the conversation flow. It's wonderful. We suggest everybody to buy a copy of Gray Mouse. A link to purchase it is in the video description below, and we can maybe add that to the chat. And just for those of you who may have joined a little bit later, we had a conversation with Olivia James, author of Gray Mouse, and we touched on Olivia's SSP memories, as well as being a survivor of MK Ultra and covert operations. And we also invite you to. You may have noticed that Mario threw down some um, really useful astrological knowledge. He is like the weatherman for astrology. So we do invite you to use coupon code Shazam when booking a. Is that still
yeah,
active?
yeah.
Okay.
It's still active.
Okay. Mario sells amazing Ayurvedic healthful salsa at starseedsalsa.com, and that's also where you can connect with Mario to for an astrological session. So, with all that being said, anything for the good of the order before we sign
Yeah,
off?
I just wanted to tease something, Olivia. Have any experiences like with the Getty Museum?
No, I haven't been there, I don't think.
Okay, all right, yeah. I was curious about that, the Getty Museum. All right, because I have experienced in my life missing time during field trips, where I intensely disassociate, staring at something, and then next thing I know, I'm all alone. My entire class is gone, and a lot of time has passed. And the Getty Museum is one of those places. And I know there's like a whole lot of trafficking and underground stuff going on there. And I was curious if you've at all experienced um, any time being there.
I'd love to break in there and remote view it with my spirit
Cool.
buddy. That'd be cool to see.
Yeah, that would be cool to say.
I like it. Yeah, there's no secrets in this realm. I like it. I think we should open up every door and just be like, "What's going on in here?
I know, right?
What's
It's
up?"
great.
And Karen L in the chat says, "Yes, part 2, please." So, Karen, we shall not disappoint. We will make this a reality. So, awesome. Olivia, thank you so much for your time with us
Yeah,
today.
thank you for having me. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. Yeah.